Hello, I'm going to show you a way to predict the price of a new house. As you know, the price of houses goes up and down, and in the past few years, the price of houses has been going up, up, up. And a lot of people are wondering, is this going to continue? If I want to buy a house, should I just buy it now? Or am I going to make a big mistake because the prices are going to come way down in a year or two and I would be better off waiting? Nobody knows. Can astrology predict how the price of houses will change? And I know from other astrologers who've been looking at this huge increase in the price of houses over the past few years has been happening in several countries. It's not just the United States. And what I did, I saw a post on Facebook of some astrologers discussing this question of what's going on with the price of houses. Are they going to just keep going up, up, up? And I got curious about it, and I Googled around to see if I could find some data on the price of houses. And at this website that I give the source for in the bottom right corner of this slide, I found this graph. I found a graph of the price of houses, and the orange line is adjusted for inflation. So the orange line really shows what the cost of the house is in a meaningful way to an individual. So it's this orange line that I'm most interested in more than the blue line. So the question is this: can we come up with a formula that would look similar to the actual prices, that would have these three peaks? See this peak here that happens to be around, looks like 1980 or so, and then another peak. So whatever year it is, we're going to look at this in detail, but we've got these three peaks, and here you see what's going on right up to March 2021, that the price just keeps going up, 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 and this is our big question. I mean, lately it's going like almost vertically up. Is this going to continue? And one way to gain some confidence that our astrology is working is to put our formula into the software and see if we can match it. And that's exactly what I did. After I found this graph, and I was not able to find the actual data, the actual prices in a file. I could only find the graph online. If I kept looking around, I'm sure I would find it. So in other words, I only have the graph. That's all I could find. I don't have the actual prices. If I had the actual prices, then we can have the Sirius software tell us exactly what the correlation is. But so I don't have the actual prices. I only have this orange line that I found of the graph, so I can still see if I can match that graph. Can we come up with a formula that's going to have a peak right here? Well, this blue line, as you might have guessed, is the result of the formula. I'm going to show you what the formula is, and I'm going to show you how I discovered the formula. But first, before we learn what the formula is, this astrological formula, or we like to use this word astrosignature, what are these astrological predictors, or whatever you want to, or variables, whatever you want to call them? What is the astrology that produces this? I will show you in a minute, and I will show you how I discovered this. And I discovered it in just a few days while doing other things. So if somebody puts a lot more time into this, you can improve this. You can definitely improve it. But already, with just working on it a modest amount of time, the graph looks pretty darn good, don't you think? I mean, here's a peak here, and we've got a peak of this predicted peak is higher than the actual peak, but it times pretty well. And then the price comes down, and then it peaks again. Almost exactly with the graph. A little bit later, but matching not too badly. Then it comes back up again. And here I think is the worst part of the forecast, or one of the worst parts, right in here. I'm predicting with this formula that the price comes back down, but it doesn't, it stays high. So this graph is not perfect, but I think it looks pretty good. And look at the end of it. The actual prices are skyrocketing, and we've got this going up. And what's happening is that the predicted prices are jumping up and down rapidly. But the market for prices doesn't change that fast. It's not that volatile. The price of a house next week isn't going to skyrocket and then come down the next week. It just doesn't work that way. Price of houses change gradually. So what appears to be happening is it's like a smoothed graph, and that's what I'm going to show you on the next slide right here. I just manually drew this myself in the Paint program. What I did is I produced this forecast in the Sirius software with the blue lines. Then I took the actual prices from the website I just showed you. I extracted that out. I clipped that out of the article. I stretched it to be the width of my forecast graph, and I overlaid it. You can do all this in the simple Paint program that comes with Windows. And then I just manually made this red line to the best of my ability to kind of make a smooth average of the blue. So it's a smoothed average, and it's this smoothed average, the red, that we can compare to the actual prices, the orange. And again, it's pretty good. We're predicting it went down and up and down and up. Actually, the prices were pretty stable during the 50s and 60s, maybe going down a little bit. It's not a perfect forecast. This predicts the prices go up more than they did, but at least it's in the right shape. And here, matches fairly well, comes back down. I think one of the worst parts of the forecast is right here, where we predict the price will go down, and it actually stayed high. So right in here. And I will show you how I made this graph. I just did it over a few days, little by little. It wasn't like I worked continuously for a few days, just tinkered around with it. And we can tinker around with it more and get it better and better. So given the amount of time put into this is very impressive. And also, what's really important is for any financial astrologers, anybody working in economic astrology, if you have an idea of what's going to cause the price of houses to go up or down, you can use the Sirius software to make that forecast. I will show you all this. First thing I want to do is just show you what the actual prices are and the predicted prices. Now, I did not find on a website yet the actual prices of the houses. I only found the graph. If we find the actual prices, in a table, we can probably, depending on how it's formatted, we can import that into the Sirius software, and then we can get actual correlation values and like a statistical analysis. But right now, since I only have the graph, we just have the visual. And I know, as I mentioned on this previous slide, I've looked at so many of these things that this is better than random. This is clearly better than random. If I had the actual prices, I'm going to guess we're going to get what we call a p-value of 0.01, maybe even 0.001. So if we get those prices, we can find out. And also, like I said, anyone can improve this formula. I'm going to show you how I found it and how I improved it. But there it is. Pretty darn cool that we can create a forecast and compare. So for the astrologers who are into economic forecasting, financial forecasting, why not take your ideas, put them into the Sirius software, and do exactly what I did? Create your forecast graph, compare it to the actual prices, and see how good it is doing. We can do these things now. Okay, so I've shown you what the forecast looks like. Now, let's see what this astro signature is. Let me go back to the previous slide. What am I looking at? Is it planets and signs or aspects? What is it I'm using? And how did I find it is what I'm going to show you now. Okay, first let's look at what it is. Then I'll show you how I found it. And when I show you how I found it, you will, that's also is the key to how to improve it. And you can improve this forecast yourself if you want to take the time to do it. So, but as I mentioned here, before we get into that, let's see what the astrosignature predicts for the future. This is what we want to know. Okay, we've got a graph that works pretty darn well. And as we look at it, it's showing here from about 2009, 2010, it's showing the price going up. It is going up. And let's see what the forecast tells us. This is the forecast from 2009 to 2034. And what we see on the previous graph is up to about here, about 2020. This is the graph going up, up, up. And what it's showing is that it's going to level off. So if this astrosignature is reasonably accurate, the price of houses will be fairly stable to about 2023, and then they go even higher. And then they come back down around 2030. So if you want to buy a house, the recommendation based on this formula, we don't know exactly how good this formula is, but it is what we would call evidence-based. We have actual evidence, actual data, an actual graph that suggests that it could actually really work. Not just someone's opinion. You can see the graph. So that's called evidence-based. Evidence-based means it's based on real data. There's evidence for it. It's not a proof. It's not absolutely certain, but at least it has solid evidence. And here is the practical information. Buy a house before 2024. I'm making this video in August 2021, and I just made this formula over the past several days. And what my advice to myself, and as well as to anyone else, because I suspect this formula has some validity, is if you want to buy a house, buy it before 2024. Otherwise, wait till around 2031. So do it now, within the next year or so, or by 2023, or wait until about 2031. Now, maybe the forecast will be completely wrong. Maybe this is not good advice, but we will see. We will see how well this works. I will say this. There's a lot of astrological financial advice being thrown around. Very little of it, in fact, I've seen almost none of it, shows you an actual graph of actual prices, real prices, and shows that the formula works. So that we have here. And I'm not a financial astrologer or anything. I just know how to do these things, and I'm going to show you how to do it right now. And if you want to sell, if you're investing in property for your own personal gain, for you to make a lot of money, then you would buy the property and sell it around 2028. Right in here around 2028, because by 2029, it's going to start coming down. It may not be till 2031, but to be safe, I would sell it around 2028, just to be safe. If the prices do keep skyrocketing, may even get even higher in 2029 or 2030, but not a whole lot higher. So right around there would be the time to sell. So we've got practical advice based on this. Very, very interesting. So we've now done 2 out of the 4 things I want to do. Number 1, I've shown you what the forecast of the prices is, and I've shown you how it compares to the actual prices. We looked at those graphs. And I showed you what the prediction for house prices is for the coming years. So if you're not interested in the astrology and you just want to know what this forecast is, I've told you that. Now, for those of you, it's probably the great majority of you watching this video who actually are interested in the astrology, let me do 2 more things. Number 3, let's see what the astrosignature is. Let's see what it is. Is it planets and signs? Is it aspects? And then lastly, I'll show you how I discovered it. Okay? So we'll take one step at a time. What is the astrosignature? Then hold on. Some of you may be wondering, okay, that's the astrosignature. How the heck did you find this thing? I'll tell you that. That'll be the last thing in this video. But first, what is it? It's midpoint structures. It's not aspects. It's not planets and signs. The forecast is not based on, oh, Jupiter went into Capricorn or something like this. No, it's not planets and signs. It's not aspects like Jupiter square Neptune or something. It's midpoint structures. It's when one planet gets in between two other planets. Now, I'm not saying that planets and signs don't work for predicting house prices. I'm not saying aspects don't work. Maybe they do work. You know, there are a lot of economic astrologers out there, financial astrologers. And if you have something that works, you could add that to my formula or create your own formula and maybe it works even better. Or maybe your insights plus these insights together will make even a more perfect graph. Now, I'm not saying that other things don't work. I'm saying that this is what I found that does work. The graph shows that it matches the actual prices. Okay, it's midpoint structures. Now, what midpoint structures are they? When I tell you what they are, you probably will be surprised because it's not the planets most astrologers would associate with house prices. But according to vibrational astrology, the system I use, it makes perfect sense. And I'll explain why it makes perfect sense. So here's what the formula looks like in the software. You know, if we go into this serious software and we run this forecast, so we're in here. Let me show you this again from the beginning. We go to forecast. Where am I here? Forecast. And we go to electional forecast. And we go to main forecast astrosignature. And then I made one. I went up here and I clicked on new search astrosignature. Now it's already created. And this is not the one I want. I want this. Uranus, Neptune, midpoints. Second revision. It's this one. This one here. It's based on midpoint structures that involve Uranus and Neptune. If I go to customize and then customize view the astrosignature, it's transit to transit, right? It's what's in the sky. The price of houses does not depend on transits to my chart or your chart. It's a fact of life out there, and we're just looking at what's in the sky. We call that transit to transit. What's in the sky, and here's the list. And what I did is I just captured this, put it in the slide, and I increased the font to make it more readable. But what I have in the slide is just this stuff, and you just click on insert new item, and you can customize the items and remove them, and you build the list of things. You can do planets and signs and aspects and parallels of declination, all kinds of stuff. That's what I did. And then over here, you put in your start date, your end date, and I'm running it from 1953 to 2021, and it takes like over an hour. If I click on begin analysis, and I run it from 1953 to 2021, unfortunately, it's rather slow. It takes, I didn't even time it, because what I did is I would run it, I'm working on other things, and then after maybe a few hours, I see that it's done. I look at the graph, I compare it to the actual prices, and I'll show you what I look at, and then I adjust it and I run it again. I just did this, periodically for a few days, and wow, came up with a formula that works very well. But I've got all kinds of other research and software features to add, and that's as far as I'm going to take it. It can obviously be taken further. This formula can be improved. Well, let's look at it. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. And here it is. And what it is, this is the list of the midpoint structures. And I've organized it in an easier to read way right here. Okay? This took a little time to organize, but I wanted to show you more clearly exactly what this astro signature is based on. And what it's based on is Uranus and Neptune. Now, again, I know that may sound strange. Most astrologers, when they think of Uranus, Neptune, they're thinking of people, hallucinating or spiritual or on drugs or whatever. Why would Uranus and Neptune be involved in the price of houses? I'll explain that. But first, let's just see what the formula is. It's a midpoint structure involving Uranus, Neptune, and another outer planet. So Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Any combination of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So it lists every combination. And what it's saying here might be too small for you to read, so I'll just read it to you. It says Uranus is conjunct the Neptune-Pluto midpoint. It has a huge orb, 15 degrees. We normally only give an orb of 1.5 degrees for midpoint structures. And what I found is by giving it this huge orb, it smoothed out the graph. Otherwise, it's very, very choppy. It made it smoother and made it easier to see that it's actually matching the prices. So you run it, you look at it, you decide what to do. And I set the orb for all of the conjunctions and oppositions to 15 degrees. So Uranus conjunct the Neptune-Pluto midpoint with a 15-degree orb, and we give it a strength, 10 points. And it doesn't matter whether it's a conjunction or opposition. And there are 3 possible midpoint structures. Uranus can be conjunct or opposition the Neptune-Pluto midpoint, or Neptune can be conjunct or opposition the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, or Pluto can be conjunct or opposition the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. 3 possible midpoint structures, depending on which of these 3 is at the midpoint, and they can be conjunct or opposition. So there's 6 possibilities. And here they are: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I did all 6 possibilities of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And when I produced the forecast, I noticed that when Pluto was at Uranus-Neptune midpoint, because Uranus and Neptune are the key planets, it's something else getting involved with Uranus and Neptune. And if the third planet is at the midpoint, it's emphasizing the Uranus-Neptune more, so I gave it more points for Pluto at Uranus-Neptune. So we have either Pluto, Saturn, or Jupiter, right? There are 5 outer planets: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And we're saying that whenever any one of the other 3, Pluto, Saturn, or Jupiter, is making a midpoint structure, any of the 6 possible midpoint structures, just like I showed you for Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, there's a total of 18 possible midpoint structures in this upper left corner, and we put each one of those into the astro signature. If that's a lot to absorb, you can watch this video again and it should make sense. So we put all of them in there, and for the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, we gave it less strength than the Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and for the Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, less strength. So the theory is that when Uranus and Neptune get activated by Pluto, which is so slow moving and so obsessive, it's incredibly strong. And by Saturn, which is moving faster and not as intense as in a way as Pluto, it also causes housing prices to go up. These are the things that make it go up, but not quite as much. So we gave it fewer points, and the Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune has the least impact, so we gave it less. And at first, I just ran these conjunctions and oppositions. And then after a while, I thought to myself, wonder if squares would work. So I put in the squares. This on the top here, top middle area, shows the squares, exactly the same idea as the conjunction and opposition. It's not as long a list because it's only squares. Here on the left, we have conjunction and opposition for every possibility, and there they are. And the orb for the square is half as big as the direct, as the conjunction and opposition. Instead of a 15-degree orb, we have a 7.5-degree orb. And that improved the formula. I was like, wow, it looked like the predicted prices when I added those improved it. And then I put in the semi-squares and sesquiquadrats with half of the orb, as we go up to these higher vibrations, we cut the orb to make it smaller. So this is a basic theory in harmonic astrology and vibrational astrology. So now we're down to a 3-degree, 45-minute orb with even weaker strengths. And here I've summarized the whole thing. So right here in this table, I've summarized it all. What the points are, I said 10/15 means 10 if it's not Uranus Neptune midpoint, and the stronger value if it is. So conjunction, so there it is. There it is. Here's the Uranus Neptune Pluto, the Saturn Uranus Neptune, the Jupiter Uranus Neptune, with all three possible kinds of aspects and the points. And basically what's happening is we're giving more points for conjunction and opposition than for the other aspects. We're giving more points for Uranus Neptune, and we're giving more points for the slower planet. And I set this up, and I fiddled around with this, working very quickly, kind of sloppy. I didn't actually organize it that carefully. And now when I documented this for this video, I noticed there's some sloppiness here. You'll notice, like, why is this 610, 510, 25? Well, that looks okay. But then this for Jupiter should be even lower, but it says 8.8. There's some inconsistency here. Maybe this should be 610 so that all of these aspects get the same value. You want to have a simple formula. It could be made simpler. Why is it not as simple? Because I did this over a few days while I'm working on other things. Like I said, we can spend more time on it, and we have two objectives, two goals. Goal number one, we want to match the actual prices. But that's not our only goal. Second goal is we need to keep the formula simple. Because if the formula is not simple, conceptually simple, then you're doing what we call in statistics overfitting. You're just randomly picking astrological things that work. I mean, if you randomly pick all kinds of weird things, sooner or later you're just going to get a match. You're not really, just sort of randomly things that happen to work. We want a conceptually simple idea. Conceptually simple doesn't mean the list of items is simple. We have a long list of items. You may say this is not simple. It's theoretically simple. That's the goal. Theoretically, in the sense, the concept is that Uranus and Neptune, with a third outer planet, makes the prices go high. We use the consistent orbs, 15 degrees for all the direct, half that for the square, and half again for the semi-square sesquiquadrat, completely consistent with theory, giving more points for the slower planets, giving more points for the direct. Some sloppiness here where this could be cleaned up and made a little bit more consistent. I think really the only one may be this conjunction and opposition with Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune. If we made this 6 and 10, then it would match and it would be consistent enough to say we're giving more for the direct and less for the others. Some kind of fairly simple set of rules. Do you have the idea? This is how we do what's called knowledge discovery. We're discovering how the astrology works. We don't know exactly. We have some ideas, and we build a model that matches the data, okay? But it's got to be theoretically fairly simple and also accurate. And very often there's a compromise. You can make your formula a little bit sloppy if it matches the data better. To the best of your ability, within reason, you try to get a formula that works. In other words, the predicted values are matching well with the actual values and keeping it simple. We have done that. Here it is, my friends. This is a simple formula that matches the data, and it was done fairly quickly. And I'll show you how I did it so quickly. It's not some magic. There are tricks, there are rules, there are ways to figure this stuff out. Okay, so that's the formula. That's the third thing I wanted to show you. What is the formula? That's it. believe it or not. I say believe it or not because number one, probably for the majority of astrologers, that midpoint structures would be the controlling factor to create prices. That's maybe surprising. Midpoint structure is not even used by most astrologers. And that it involves Uranus and Neptune. What the heck? Why is that? I'll explain why that theoretically makes sense. And midpoint structures throughout all of the vibrational astrology research are very important. We see them with accidents, for example. Okay, so there it is. I think I've now covered everything that I mentioned in my notes on the right side. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yes, I explained all this. Let me just see if I missed anything. Yeah, point number 4, I experimented. I would run the forecast. It takes, I think, about an hour. I didn't even time it. I would come back later, and then if it was done, I've got it running, and I just look, is it done yet? Then if it's done, I click on save, and I save it. And then I look at what I changed. Did I decrease the points? Did I add squares? Did I add semi-squares? And I look at my previous one. Did it help? Does the graph look closer to the actual prices, or does it look worse? And you just fiddle with it. You just think to yourself based on your theory. My theory is that, well, if the direct midpoint structures work, maybe the squares will work, but I need to give them half the orb and probably less strength. Why? Because that's how my theory works. You guess based on your theory. You may have a different theory. Most people wouldn't even be looking at midpoints, okay? But you look for things that are close to how you think it works. See if your ideas work and find out exactly how they do work. So this is theory-based exploratory research. We're exploring, we're building a model based on ideas that we have, but we're not exactly certain. We're not certain whether the squares will work. So we're exploring based on things that are reasonable, based on a theory. We're not just randomly guessing anything. That's how I do it. It's not the only way. It's not necessarily the best way. Every researcher, every astrologer works differently. It's the best for me. That's how I do it. Maybe somebody will make breakthroughs using a completely different approach. But this approach that I use works. It works in the sense that we can create these models that actually match the data, and sometimes with relatively little effort. People have been researching and exploring things like this for decades, but now with the software, with the theory, with the tools, and the understanding, we have ways to discover these things. Okay, now, let me see what's my previous slide. Okay, now, we are on step 4. How did I discover it? So I've covered the first 3 things. And the third item is, what is the astrosignature? And I'll talk later about why this astrosignature makes sense, why Uranus and Neptune are involved. I'll get to that later. But let's go on to the 4th thing, which is, how did I find it? Here's how I find it. What I did is I look at the peak dates. I look at these dates here. And then I figure out what's going on these peak dates. And from that, I build the formula. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this video into 2 sections because I'm now at 34 minutes. So let's pick up with part 4 of this 4 points that I'm making. The 4th point of how do we discover this? I'll put that in a separate video because I like to keep the videos around a half hour long. So let's have a part 1 and part 2. In part 2, I will explain how I found the formula, and that good chance that'll take a half hour to explain how you find the formula, which is also the way you improve the formula. And I'll also talk about why the Uranus-Neptune actually makes sense from the point of view of the astrology that I do anyway. Okay, my friends, I'll see you in part 2, and we'll learn how to make these discoveries, how to find a graph that matches the actual data. Once you have a forecast that matches actual data, now there's some hope that it will match future data, especially if your formula is theoretically simple, as I've emphasized. If your formula is fairly simple, not like some hodgepodge, like I'm going to use this parallel of declination and this, it's just like a hodgepodge, and I've used different orbs for each thing. If you got this sort of like random combination of variables, it's not going to work with new data. I mean, it's just not. You have to be realistic about it. It's got to have some kind of simple basis to it. Now, you may disagree with that, but this is an idea in data mining that people use, and I found it's very true with astrological research. So, there are many different ways to do research, many different concepts, but this is one idea. I could cite sources and all that stuff, but anyway, and it's fundamental to how I do it. It does what we call in statistics prevent overfitting. Have a conceptually simple idea that matches the data fairly well. Now you've got some hope that it might actually be true and would work when you test new data. And over the next 20 years or so, people come back 20 years later, they will see if the forecast worked. And if it does, that's a strong suggestion that this formula actually works. If it doesn't, it's a suggestion that probably it doesn't work. It could still be luck. You need to test things many times. But as we get new data, we will find out. We'll get more information about how likely it is that this formula works. Okay, the fact that it's simple and it matches fairly well already is a strong indication that there's a very, very good chance it works. Okay, let's stop here and I will show you how I found the formula in part 2. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.